Single dad buys coffee for crying woman. She's the wealthiest investor in the state. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning frost clung stubbornly to the edges of Noah Carter's windshield as he parked outside the corner cafe, the old Civic creaking in protest as he shut off the engine. The heater barely worked, but at least it got him and Maddie where they needed to go. He glanced at the dashboard clock, 6:42 a.m., and then into the back seat, where his daughter still dozed, arms wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, cheeks rosy from the cold. Her breath fogged the window with every soft exhale. Noah exhaled slowly. These quiet moments, before the town woke, and the day demanded more than he had to give, were his only pause. He stepped into the cafe with his hands buried in his jacket pockets, the bell above the door giving a tired jingle. Inside it was warm, and the scent of cinnamon, espresso, and baked goods wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. "Morning, Noah," said Jules from behind the counter, already steaming milk and half asleep herself. "The usual?" He gave her a nod. "And a hot chocolate for Maddie. She's out like a light in the car." "Cold one today," Jules said, sliding a sleeve up to wipe the fog from the display case. "You got heat in that old thing?" "Barely," he said, grinning. "But we layer." As he stepped aside to wait, he noticed her, seated alone at the corner table, tucked away like she didn't want to be noticed. Her coat was a tailored navy wool, nice but rumpled. One glove on, one off. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or pretending to read, just sitting, staring into a half-empty cup like it held answers. And there were tears, just a few, quietly slipping down her cheek as if she hadn't realized they were falling. Noah glanced at the counter. "Hey, Jules, can you add another coffee to that? Extra cream, no sugar." "For her?" Jules asked quietly. He nodded. Moments later he walked over and gently placed the cup on the table. "Thought you might need this." The woman blinked up at him, startled. Her eyes were sharp but tired, like someone used to holding the world together with steady hands, until today. "Thank you," she whispered. Noah smiled softly. "Hope your morning turns around." Then he walked back out into the cold, never expecting to see her again. Noah didn't usually pay much attention to other people's business. Life had taught him that most folks carried a weight you couldn't see, and the kindest thing you could do was give them space. But something about the woman in the corner booth tugged at his attention like a loose thread he couldn't ignore. She sat with her back partly to the window, shoulders drawn in, like she was trying to shrink away from the world. A scarf lay draped on the table beside her untouched muffin, and her coffee had gone cold. He could see the faint skin forming across the top. The coat she wore wasn't flashy, but it was high quality, the kind people with money wore when they were trying not to look like they had any. Her hands were still, her gaze distant, and then he saw the tears. They weren't loud or dramatic, no sobs, no gasps, just quiet streams down her cheeks, like her face had betrayed an emotion she'd worked too hard to keep buried. Noah shifted in his seat, the warm cup in his hand suddenly feeling heavier. He hated seeing people cry. It reminded him of the days after Claire died, how he'd wept in the garage after Maddie went to bed, hoping the silence would swallow him whole. That kind of grief had a way of recognizing itself in others. He told himself to leave it alone, to drink his coffee, pick up Maddie from the car, and go on with the day. But instead, he stood up. She didn't notice him until he set the second coffee on her table, her head lifted, slow, almost cautious, and when her eyes met his, they were sharp green glass behind the tears. For a second, neither of them said anything. "I figured you might need a refill," Noah said gently. Her lips parted as if the simple kindness had knocked the wind from her. "You didn't have to." "No," he replied, "but I wanted to." She blinked once, like she hadn't heard those words in a long time. Then she nodded, a whisper of a thank you forming as she wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Noah didn't wait for her to say more. He gave her a small, respectful nod and turned to leave, not wanting to intrude any further. He understood the kind of silence she was sitting in, one that wrapped tight around your ribs and made words feel like sharp edges. It wasn't something you fixed with conversation. Sometimes the only thing that helped was knowing someone noticed you, that you weren't completely invisible. He took his seat again by the window, hands wrapped around his own cup as he stared out at the frost-glazed sidewalk. The world moved on, indifferent. People came and went, heads down, chasing their own timelines, but every so often, life slowed just enough for two strangers to exist in the same space at the same time, both carrying more than they said out loud. Across the room, she didn't touch the new coffee at first. Her hands stayed resting on either side of it, as if she needed time to believe the warmth was real. Her eyes stayed down, but something in her posture shifted, just a little. The tightness in her shoulders eased. The corner of her mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile, but might become one, given time. Noah didn't stare. He just sipped his drink and watched the morning unfold. His phone buzzed with a reminder about Maddie's parent-teacher conference, and he made a mental note to call the school later. Life didn't pause, even for grief, especially for grief. When he finally stood to leave, he glanced back once. The woman had taken a sip. Her fingers cradled the cup like it was a lifeline. And though her eyes didn't meet his again, she looked steadier, like the moment had rooted her. Just enough. Noah stepped out into the cold, the air biting, but somehow not as harsh. He didn't know her name, didn't expect to see her again. But the gesture stayed with him, a quiet reminder that the smallest kindness could shift the weight of a heavy day. And somewhere behind him, in a corner booth filled with quiet light, a stranger held on to that warmth like it mattered, because it did. Noah carried the warmth of the cafe with him long after the cold bit back through his jacket. The drive to the daycare was quiet, save for the soft hum of the heater trying its best, and the occasional rattle from something loose in the back seat. In the rearview mirror, Maddie stirred, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists and blinking into the early morning light. "Hey, sleepyhead," he said softly, glancing back at her at a red light. "Did I miss breakfast?" she asked, voice still groggy. "Not yet. Got your hot chocolate," he said, holding up the cup with a smile. Her face lit up, even if her hair was a tangle and her coat had half a zipper undone. "Thanks, Daddy." They pulled into the daycare parking lot just as the sun started to peek over the trees, casting a gold shimmer across the frozen grass. Noah helped Maddie with her backpack and walked her to the door, her small hand curled into his gloved one. After a quick hug and a promise to pick her up early, he headed back toward the car. But that face from the cafe still lingered in the back of his mind, the woman with the sad eyes. He couldn't shake the way she looked, not just the tears but the hollowness behind them, like someone who'd spent a long time holding everything together and had finally, quietly, let go, if only for a moment. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror a few years back, when the grief was still raw and waking up each morning felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. Back home, he tossed his keys into the dish by the door and kicked off his boots. The apartment was still quiet, sunlight leaking in through the blinds. He poured himself another cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and stared at nothing in particular. There was no reason he should still be thinking about her, no reason at all. But her eyes had said something her mouth never would, and it stayed with him. A quiet ache, a silent question. A moment he didn't expect to matter, and somehow it did. The next morning, Noah found himself back at Brewhouse Café earlier than usual. He told himself it was just part of the routine. Drop Maddie off, grab a coffee, head to the shop. But if he was being honest, part of him was hoping she'd be there. Not because he expected anything, just curiosity. Or maybe something quieter, something he didn't quite want to name. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped in. Warmth wrapped around him like a familiar blanket, and the scent of fresh ground beans and cinnamon rolls made his stomach grumble. He glanced toward the corner booth before he even reached the counter. She was there, same coat, same quiet posture. But this time, she wasn't crying. She looked up as the door closed behind him, and when her eyes met his, something shifted. Recognition, and then, slowly, a small, genuine smile. He ordered his coffee, feeling unexpectedly unsure of himself. Should he say something? Leave her be? But before that he could overthink it, she gestured gently toward the empty seat across from her. "If you've got a minute," she said, "I owe you more than a thank you." Noah hesitated only a second, then walked over and sat down. "You don't owe me anything," he said. She wrapped her hands around her cup, the ceramic warm against her skin. "Still, thank you. I wasn't in the best place yesterday." "No apology needed," he paused. "I've had days like that." She nodded slowly, as if she believed him. "Sophie," she said finally, offering her hand across the table. "Sophie Lang." "Noah Carter," he replied, shaking her hand. For a moment the noise of the cafe seemed to fade. They sat in quiet understanding, two people with more history than they were ready to share. He didn't ask what had made her cry, and she didn't ask why he'd noticed. Instead they talked about coffee, winter, and the town's strange obsession with holiday parades. It was simple, uncomplicated. But when Sophie laughed at something he said, Noah realized it was the first time he'd heard that sound from her, and it made him want to hear it again. Sophie couldn't remember the last time someone asked her about her favorite book. Not her net worth, not her market predictions, not what she thought about emerging tech sectors or her thoughts on the next fiscal quarter. Just, "What do you like to read?" She stared at Noah across the table, a beat too long, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. His coffee was nearly empty, a light ring at the bottom of the mug. He wasn't staring at his phone, wasn't scanning the room for someone more important. He was just sitting there, listening, really listening. She blinked, then let out a breathy laugh. "I don't think anyone's asked me that in, I don't know, years." Noah tilted his head, an easy smile on his face. "That long, huh? What, do you run with a crowd that doesn't believe in paperbacks?" She smiled, the edges of it soft and real. "You could say that." "Well," he said, leaning back slightly, "if I'm going to keep buying you coffee, I should at least know if I'm sitting across from a mystery fan or someone who dog-ears romance novels." She looked down at her cup, then back up at him with a spark of something playful in her eyes. Historical fiction, the sad kind, where everyone's heart gets broken at least once. Noah chuckled. "Of course, I should have guessed." The conversation shifted then, easy and unforced. They talked about books and movies, old diners, snowstorms, and their mutual hatred of cold hands and icy sidewalks. Noah mentioned his daughter, just in passing, and Sophie didn't push. She just listened, eyes thoughtful, head tilted slightly like she was memorizing every word. What struck her most was what he didn't ask. He didn't ask where she lived, or what she did for work, or how she could afford a coat that nice. He didn't look at her like she was anyone other than the woman in front of him. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sophie felt something loosen inside her. Not everyone saw her as an asset or an investment. Some people, like Noah, just saw a person, and that unexpectedly mattered. Noah didn't usually talk about Emma, not because it hurt too much, though it still did, but because most people didn't know what to say once he did. They'd offer a sad smile, tilt their head, and say something like, "She's in a better place, or "At least you had time together," and then the air would thicken with silence and pity. But with Sophie, it didn't feel like that. They were sitting across from each other at their now usual booth in Brewhouse Café, the morning crowd thinning out, the scent of coffee and cinnamon still lingering like comfort. Sophie was unhurried, her hands curled around her cup, and her eyes steady, curious, not intrusive. "Do you mind if I ask?" she said gently. "You mentioned your daughter yesterday. Is it just the two of you?" Noah nodded, running a thumb over the rim of his mug. "Yeah, just us." Sophie didn't push, just waited, giving him space like she somehow knew he needed the silence before the story. "Emma, my wife, she passed away 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Cancer. It was quick. Too quick." Sophie's expression didn't change. No flinching, no well-meaning platitudes, just something soft behind her eyes that made it easier to keep going. Losing her felt like losing the whole map, you know? Suddenly, I was just trying to raise this little girl, fix cars during the day, fold laundry at night, and figure out how to make something normal out of what didn't feel like anything close to normal. Sophie nodded slowly. "That sounds heavy." "It was," he admitted. "Still is some days, but Maddie, she's tough. Got her mom's spark. Some mornings she's the one pulling me out of bed." Sophie smiled, and it wasn't the polished, practiced kind he imagined she gave at meetings or fundraisers. It was real, warm, the kind that reached her eyes. "You talk about her like she's your reason for everything," she said. "She is," Noah replied. "Cars pay the bills, but Maddie's what keeps me going." For a moment Sophie said nothing, just looked at him with a kind of quiet reverence, like maybe, just maybe, she'd found something rare, something real. The cafe was quieter now, the morning rush long gone. Sunlight spilled through the front windows, catching tiny dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, the frost was melting, leaving behind puddles that shimmered with early light. Inside, the warmth lingered, not just from the coffee, but from the quiet comfort of a conversation neither of them had expected. Noah leaned back in his seat, the last sips of his drink forgotten, his smile more relaxed than it had been in weeks. Across from him, Sophie tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and glanced down at her hands, her expression thoughtful. "You ever think about doing your own thing?" she asked, her voice casual, but edged with something more. He raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "Your own shop. Not just fixing cars for someone else. Owning it. Building it how you want to." Noah chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Sure, I've thought about it. In the same way people think about living in Paris or flying to the moon, doesn't mean it's anywhere close to real." Sophie reached into her coat pocket without a word and pulled out a small, off-white business card. No logo, no bold typeface or flashy title, just a name, hers, and a phone number, written in simple black ink. She slid it across the table toward him. "Call me if you ever want to talk about that Paris trip," she said, her tone light, but her eyes steady. Noah looked down at the card, then up at her, something unspoken passing between them. There was a weight to the gesture, not pressure, not pity, but possibility. "I'm not asking for anything," she added quickly, "and I'm not offering charity. I just think you're the kind of person who deserves more than what he's settling for." Noah didn't know what to say, so he nodded and slipped the card into his wallet like it was something fragile. Sophie stood then, gathering her coat and scarf. "I should go, but thank you for the coffee and the company." He watched her walk out, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her. And for the first time in a long while, Noah felt like maybe, just maybe, the map was starting to redraw itself. Later that afternoon, the hum of pneumatic drills and clanking tools filled the garage, the familiar soundtrack of Noah's days. Grease smudged his knuckles, and the smell of motor oil clung to his clothes like a second skin. The work was good, honest, predictable. But for the first time in a while, Noah's mind wasn't on the busted radiator in front of him. It was back at the cafe, on the card now burning a quiet hole in his wallet. During a slow stretch between jobs, he wandered into the break room where Tom, his longtime friend and fellow mechanic, was hunched over a vending machine, smacking it like it owed him money. "Stupid thing ate my dollar again," Tom muttered. "Maybe it's trying to tell you to eat a vegetable," Noah said with a half smile. Tom snorted. "Yeah, and maybe the junkyard will start handing out raises." Noah reached into his back pocket, pulling out the card. He hesitated a second before handing it over. "Hey, you ever seen this before?" Tom took it, squinting at the plain white card like it was some kind of riddle. "Sophie Lang," he read aloud. No title, just a number. He frowned, then pulled out his phone. "Wait a sec." Noah leaned against the counter, arms folded. He hadn't planned on showing anyone, but something about the moment felt too strange to keep to himself. Tom tapped at his screen, then suddenly paused. "Dude." He looked up, eyebrows raised. "You know who this is?" Noah shrugged. "Her name's Sophie. We've had a couple conversations. Nice woman." "Nice woman," Tom laughed, short and stunned. "Noah, this number's linked to Lang Holdings. That's Sophie Lang. She's one of the top private investors in the state. Real estate, venture capital, tech, you name it. This woman could probably buy half of Maple Glen with what's in her glove compartment." Noah blinked, thrown by the weight of it. He hadn't Googled her, hadn't thought to. She didn't act like someone with that kind of money. No entourage, no air of importance, just warm eyes, a sad smile, and a second cup of coffee. "Well," Noah said quietly, taking the card back, "she sure doesn't act like it." Tom stared at him. "You seriously didn't know?" Noah shook his head, slipping the card back into his wallet. "I didn't ask." And for some reason, that made all the difference. Noah waited until Maddie was asleep before pulling out his laptop. She'd gone down easy, curled up under her galaxy-printed blanket, the stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. He kissed her forehead, turned out the light, and stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. Nights like this were usually his quiet time, dishwashing, bill, paying, maybe a little reading before bed. But tonight his mind was buzzing. The business card sat on the kitchen table, harmless and plain. Still, the way Tom had looked at him after recognizing the name had stuck with him. Lang Holdings, billionaire, real estate, tech, venture capital. He opened a browser window, typed in Sophie Lang, and hit Enter. Within seconds, a flurry of headlines and photos filled the screen. Sophie Langford, named youngest member of state's billionaire investors circle. Lang Holdings acquires majority share in Mid-State Development Corp. Private, powerful, and unpredictable, inside the mind of Sophie Langford. There she was, in polished gowns at galas, giving speeches at economic summits, posing for magazine covers with industry titans twice her age, the same eyes, the same quiet intensity. But nothing like the woman who'd sat across from him in a cafe, sipping lukewarm coffee in a coat that looked like it had seen better days. He clicked on one article, scanning through words like ruthless strategist and quiet powerhouse. Another detailed her investments in green tech and urban revitalization. Still another hinted at a notoriously guarded personal life, rarely photographed outside of professional events. Noah sat back in his chair, the information swirling around him like smoke. Sophie Langford wasn't just well off. She was one of the names, the kind that reshaped cities and rewrote contracts with the flick of a pen. And yet, she'd talked to him like an old friend, laughed at his corny jokes, asked about his daughter with real interest. Not once had she mentioned any of this. He stared at the card again, fingers brushing its edge. The simplicity of it felt different now, intentional, like she wanted someone to see her, not her name, her fortune, or the empire behind her. And somehow he had. The bell over the door chimed as Noah stepped into Brewhouse Café, the scent of dark roast and baked cinnamon washing over him like habit. He didn't come expecting to see her, not really. But there was a part of him, quiet, stubborn, that had hoped. And there she was, Sophie, same table, same coat. Her hair was pulled back this time, neat and deliberate, like she was trying to keep herself tucked in. She looked up as he entered, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. Relief, guilt, something in between. He ordered his coffee without thinking, but his eyes never left her. When he walked over, she met him halfway with a soft, cautious smile. "Hi," she said. He sat down across from her, exhaling through his nose. For a long second he didn't speak, just studied her face like he was trying to reconcile two versions of the same woman. "You're Sophie Langford," he said finally. It wasn't an accusation, just fact. She didn't flinch. Yes. Noah nodded slowly, fingers wrapped around his cup for something to do. You own half the downtown skyline. You've got more investments than my town has streetlights, and you didn't think that might be worth mentioning? Sophie's eyes didn't waver. I didn't lie, Noah. No, he said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You just left out a few $1 billion worth of details. She let out a breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. If I'd told you who I was, you'd have looked at me differently. He thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe he would have been polite, careful. Maybe he would have assumed she was slumming it for the novelty. I wanted to sit across from someone who didn't want something from me, she said quietly. Someone who didn't see dollar signs when I walked in the room. Noah watched her for a long moment. She looked tired, but not from lack of sleep, from the weight of being known for all the wrong things. I didn't see dollar signs, he said finally. I saw someone who looked like she needed a warm cup of coffee. Her eyes softened. And I still do, she whispered. They sat in that booth a little longer than usual, the hum of the cafe soft around them, the outside world muffled behind fogged windows. Sophie stirred her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the swirl of cream, as if it could explain the thoughts running through her mind. Noah didn't press her. He never did. That was part of what she liked about him. His patience, the way he gave silence room to breathe. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted, less guarded, more resolved. I've been thinking, she said. That sounds dangerous, he teased, but his smile faded when he saw how serious she was. I meant what I said. You're the kind of person who deserves more than just scraping by. He tilted his head, unsure where she was going. You told me you've dreamed of having your own shop, she continued. A place where people could bring their cars without feeling like they were walking into a trap. Fair prices, honest work, maybe even apprenticeships for kids who can't afford college. Sure, he said cautiously. It's a nice dream. Doesn't mean it's doable. It is, Sophie said quietly. She reached into her coat and slid a folded sheet of paper across the table. Blueprints. Preliminary. I had someone mock it up after our last conversation. Noah stared at the paper, then at her. You're serious. I'm offering to fund it, she said simply. Startup costs, building, tools, everything you'd need to open. He didn't touch the plans. Why? Her answer came without hesitation. Because I believe in people like you, and because this town needs more businesses that care about more than profits. He swallowed. So what's the catch? Sophie leaned in slightly. There isn't one. No contracts, no expectations, just be honest. With your customers, with your crew, with yourself. Noah exhaled, feeling like the room had tilted slightly beneath him. You're offering me a future I never thought I'd have. Sophie smiled, soft and sincere. Noah, I'm not giving you anything. I'm just handing you the keys. And somehow that felt even more impossible. Noah didn't sleep much that night. The plans Sophie had handed him sat folded on the kitchen table, untouched but impossible to ignore. He'd tried putting them away, tucked them under a stack of bills at one point, even shoved them into the drawer next to the junk mail, but they kept resurfacing, like a whisper you couldn't drown out. It wasn't the money that unsettled him, or even the idea of change. It was something older, deeper, something tied to every moment he'd ever had to swallow his pride just to keep the lights on, every time he'd been offered a hand and wondered if it came with a leash. The next morning, he dropped Maddie at school, drove straight past the garage, and found himself back at Brewhouse Café before he even realized he was going there. Sophie was already at the corner booth, a book open in front of her, coffee in hand. She looked up as he approached, her smile quiet and hopeful. But he didn't sit this time. He stood beside the table, one hand curled around the folded blueprint like it might burn him. I can't take this, he said. Her smile faltered, just slightly. Why? Because it feels like too much, Noah said. Too fast, I don't know, like I'm the subject of one of those feel-good articles people scroll past online. Sophie closed the book, her fingers steady. It's not charity, Noah. I know, but it feels like it. She waited, calm and patient, while he sat down with a tired sigh. I've worked my whole life to stay on my feet, he said. I've patched up my car with duct tape and prayer. I've fixed other people's problems for a paycheck that barely covers groceries, and now you show up with solutions I didn't ask for, and I don't know what that makes me if I say yes. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then, it makes you someone who deserves more. Noah shook his head. Maybe, but I need to find a way to get there that's mine. He slid the blueprint back across the table. Thank you, really, but I can't say yes. Not yet. And though disappointment flickered across her face, Sophie only nodded. Okay, she said softly. Not yet. Sophie didn't come to the cafe for a few days after that. Noah told himself it didn't matter. He had work, Maddie, life to handle. But still, every morning he found his eyes drifting to that corner booth, expecting, or maybe just hoping, to see her there. When he didn't, the silence felt louder. Then, on Thursday, she returned. No book, no coffee, just Sophie, sitting in that same booth, her coat still buttoned, like she hadn't decided if she was staying. When she saw Noah walk in, she didn't smile this time, just met his eyes with something raw and unguarded. He joined her without a word. I didn't come to convince you, she said after a moment. You said no, and I respect that. Noah nodded slowly. But you came anyway. Because there's something I didn't tell you, and I think maybe you should know it. The hum of the espresso machine buzzed softly in the background. Outside, the sky was the color of steel, snow flirting with the idea of falling. Inside, Sophie's voice dropped low, quieter than he'd ever heard it. Everyone thinks wealth fixes everything, that once you have enough zeros in your account, your life clicks into place like some solved puzzle. She looked down at her hands, then out the window. But the more I had, the lonelier I got. Friends started acting different. Conversations revolved around deals, image, power. I'd walk into rooms and people stopped seeing me. They saw access, leverage. Her jaw tensed. I can buy properties, fund startups, crash markets if I'm not careful, but I can't buy trust. I can't buy real conversation. I can't walk into a room without wondering what someone wants from me. Noah didn't interrupt. I didn't offer to help you because I feel sorry for you, she continued. I offered because for the first time in a long time, I met someone who doesn't ask what I do or what I own. You looked me in the eye and asked if I was okay. She paused. You didn't see a billionaire. You saw a woman having a hard day. That meant more to me than I knew how to say. Noah's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. So why keep coming here? Sophie looked at him, and for the first time her armor cracked just enough to let the truth through. Because this place is the only thing in my life that feels real. And this time, Noah didn't look away. It was a Saturday morning thick with the smell of butter and syrup, the kind of morning where time slowed down just enough to notice it. Noah flipped a waffle onto a plate and slid it across the table toward Maddie, who sat cross-legged in her chair, hair wild from sleep, eyes bright with weekend energy. The knock on the door was soft but unmistakable. Noah wiped his hands on a towel and opened it to find Sophie standing there, cheeks pink from the cold, a bakery bag in one hand, and a hesitant smile on her face. I brought scones, she said. Bribery, in case this is weird. Noah stepped aside, waving her in. You didn't have to. I know, she said, stepping into the warmth, but I wanted to. Maddie peeked around the corner and grinned. You're the lady from the cafe. Sophie laughed. Guilty. She cries sometimes, Maddie whispered to Noah, not quite quietly enough. Sophie's cheeks flushed deeper, but she only smiled and knelt to Maddie's level. Only on bad days, but your dad makes really good coffee, so that helps. Breakfast was casual, the kind of cozy chaos that came with syrupy fingers and lopsided waffles. Sophie fit in surprisingly well, helping Maddie cut her waffle into bite-sized pieces, laughing when Noah's coffee machine made a horrible sputtering sound, and nodding along as Maddie explained the complex rules of her imaginary game involving unicorn detectives. After they ate, Noah pulled out the blueprints Sophie had left him, the ones he hadn't touched since the day he turned her down. But this time, he unrolled them across the table. "I've been thinking," he said, voice quiet. Sophie raised her eyebrows, hope flickering behind her eyes. "I don't want someone else's vision, but maybe we could build something together, my way." "Absolutely," she said. They began sketching with pencils and crayons, Maddie climbing up on her knees to peer over the plans. She jabbed at one corner with a syrup-sticky finger. "That's where the snack machine should go," she said seriously, "and you should call it Lila's garage." "Lila's?" Noah asked, surprised. Maddie grinned. "Yeah, because then it's part mine, too." Sophie looked at them, father, daughter, crayons and all, and smiled. "It already is." The garage wasn't built yet, but Noah could already see it, not in concrete and drywall, not in tool racks or service bays, but in the sketch lines across the kitchen table, in the way Maddie had scrawled her name across the bottom of the blueprint like a proud little co-owner, and in the quiet confidence he felt growing in places that had been empty for too long. Sophie sat across from him, one leg tucked under the other, coffee in hand, watching him with that patient, steady look she always wore when she was waiting for someone to find their own answer. She hadn't pushed, not once. She'd given him space and choice and the rare kind of trust that didn't come with strings or fine print. Noah reached for the pencil one more time and circled a part of the sketch near the front doors. Waiting area should have big windows, real light, and maybe a play corner for kids. Parents shouldn't have to choose between car trouble and a meltdown. Sophie's smile was soft. "That sounds perfect." He leaned back, the tension in his shoulders finally starting to ease. It wasn't just that she believed in the idea. It was that she believed in him, his values, his vision, the kind of shop he wanted to build, a place that didn't just fix things, but helped people feel like they hadn't been taken for a ride. And for the first time, Noah let himself imagine it without flinching. A real business, his business, built with calloused hands, maybe, but a full heart. "I'm in," he said. Sophie didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, a breath catching behind her eyes like she'd been holding it this whole time. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a fresh manila folder. Contracts, timelines, startup estimates already printed and ready. "You're sure?" she asked. Noah nodded, more certain than he'd expected to be. "Not because of the money, that helps, sure. But this is about finally doing something that feels right. For me. For Maddie." Sophie smiled, eyes bright. "Then let's build it." The first morning of construction, Noah stood on the edge of the gravel lot, hands in his jacket pockets, heart thudding like a stubborn engine. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the sky was beginning to blush with light, casting long shadows over the raw, open space where Lila's garage would soon stand. Beside him, Maddie clutched a thermos of hot chocolate with both hands, her boots slightly too big and her excitement barely contained. She looked up at the big empty lot like it was a canvas. To her, this wasn't a construction site. It was magic in the making. "Is it really happening, Daddy?" she asked. Noah smiled, his breath curling in the cold air. "Yeah, Bug, it's really happening." The hum of engines pulled his attention toward the street as the first trucks arrived. Contractors, surveyors, equipment operators. Sophie had arranged everything quietly and efficiently, never stepping into the spotlight, never making a show of her involvement. She stood a little off to the side, dressed in a simple coat and scarf, her smile reserved but proud. Noah gave her a nod, one she returned with a quiet understanding. This was his, and she was here to help it stay that way. By noon, The lot was buzzing with movement. Stakes were being placed, concrete lines marked out, and Noah found himself talking to people with clipboards, asking questions he'd never had to ask before. Permits, zoning, materials. It was overwhelming, but not suffocating. With each answer, each decision, his confidence grew. Sophie stayed nearby, stepping in only when asked. When a supplier tried to shortchange an order, Noah handled it firmly, and Sophie didn't say a word, just smiled a little, like a teacher watching a student realize they didn't need help. Later, while Maddie drew hearts and wrenches in the dirt with a stick, Noah stood beside Sophie and looked over the beginnings of what used to be just a dream. "You're good at this," she said softly. "I'm learning," he replied. "Quickly." He looked at her then, and for a moment the noise of the sight faded. "So are we really doing this?" he asked, half grinning. "We already are," Sophie said, and the way she said it made him believe it more than ever. It didn't take long for the town to notice. Maple Glen wasn't a place where things stayed quiet for long, especially not new construction on a prime corner lot with top-tier contractors and fresh equipment rolling in daily, and certainly not when the project was led by a single dad mechanic who, up until a month ago, had been patching up rusted sedans in a borrowed garage bay. At first the whispers were low and harmless, curiosity mostly. "Did you hear Noah Carter's opening a shop? Good for him. That guy's been through enough." But as the foundation was poured and the sleek new sign reading Lila's Garage went up, the tone shifted. "You think he won the lottery or something? There's no way he's funding that on a mechanic's salary. Someone's backing him. The question is who and why." By the time the framing began, the cafe wasn't just a place for coffee. It was the unofficial headquarters for speculation. People tried to be subtle, but Noah felt it all the same. Lingering glances when he walked in, conversations that quieted when he approached. A couple of old high school classmates even stopped him outside the hardware store, their grins more cutting than kind. "Didn't know you had friends in high places, Carter," one of them said, clapping him on the shoulder a little too hard. "Guess honesty finally pays off," Noah replied with a tight smile, and walked away. Sophie felt it too. She came around less during the day now, choosing to visit the site early in the morning or late in the afternoon, avoiding the spotlight, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew Noah needed to stand on his own. Still, her absence only fueled the rumors. One morning at the cafe, Jules leaned across the counter with a hesitant look. "Noah, off the record, is it true? Is that woman funding the whole thing?" He took a sip of his coffee before answering. "She's a friend," he said simply. "She believed in something I was too scared to believe in myself. It wasn't the explanation people wanted, but it was the truth. The trouble started with a wall. It wasn't just any wall. It was the outer west section of Lila's garage, the one that was supposed to house the customer waiting area with the big windows Noah had insisted on. But when he showed up that morning, coffee in one hand and blueprints in the other, the wall was going up solid, no windows, no light. Just a blank gray slab of concrete. Noah stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, heart sinking. He pulled the foreman aside and asked why the plans had been changed. "They weren't," the man said, distracted and defensive. "We just ran with what the build sheet said. You'll have to talk to the project coordinator." Noah didn't know there was a project coordinator until Sophie showed up 15 minutes later in her signature tailored coat, coffee in hand, and calmly mentioned she'd made a few small adjustments to streamline the construction timeline. "Small adjustments?" he asked, trying to keep his voice level. "You mean scrapping the only windows in the customer lounge?" Sophie blinked, surprised by the sharpness in his tone. "It's temporary. I figured it could be added later. The supplier was delayed, and the crew needed to stay on schedule." "Without asking me?" Sophie straightened. She wasn't angry, but her posture changed. Her tone clipped just slightly. "Noah, it's a detail. I made a judgment call based on what would keep things moving." "And I get that," he said, setting down his coffee. "But this is supposed to be my shop. I can't run a place built on someone else's shortcuts, even if they're well-meaning." A pause hung in the air. The construction noise seemed to fade under the weight of that single truth. Sophie looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time there was no defense in her voice, just understanding. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm used to being the one calling the shots. It's a habit I need to unlearn." Noah exhaled, some of the tension bleeding out of his shoulders. "I don't want to fight you. I just want us to build this the right way, together." She nodded, smile tugging at the edge of her lips. "Then we will, window and all." The garage site was quiet that evening, the crews gone, the heavy machinery at rest. The sun hovered low, casting long shadows across the concrete floor and half-framed walls. Noah stood in what would eventually be his office, staring out through the new window that had finally been installed. Sophie leaned against a support beam nearby, arms folded, a small smile on her lips. "It's starting to look real," she said. Noah nodded, but his mind seemed far away. She noticed it right away, the way his hands were tucked deep into his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. Not tense exactly, but heavy, carried. "I used to imagine Emma standing here," he said suddenly. "If we ever made it this far. She believed I could do this long before I ever did." Sophie stayed quiet, letting him speak at his own pace. "She died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Fast and mean. We caught it too late." He looked down, voice rough. "I keep thinking I should have noticed something sooner. Maybe if we'd had more money, better doctors." "Noah," Sophie said gently, "you can't carry that." He gave her a hollow smile. "I already do." The wind stirred the plastic sheets covering the windows. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Sophie stepped forward, voice low. "I was engaged once." He looked over, surprised. His name was Andrew. He was polished, charming, from the same kind of world I was born into, private schools, boardrooms, parties where everyone smiles too much. She let out a breath. He wanted me, but only the version of me that fit his world. The Sophie who didn't question anything, the one who'd smile and play the part. What happened? I started saying no. She smiled faintly, and he started looking elsewhere. Noah winced. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "Better to lose someone for who you are than keep them for who you're not." He nodded slowly. "That's something Emma used to say." Sophie looked at him then, really looked. "Your wife must have been one hell of a woman." "She was," he said, a quiet ache in his voice. "But I think she'd like you." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. And somewhere in it, something softened. Not fixed, not forgotten, but lighter. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The morning Lila's garage opened its doors. The new sign gleamed in the sunlight, bold letters painted in soft navy and brushed silver, flanked by potted plants and balloons Maddie had picked out herself, most of them pink. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors, former customers, curious passers-by, and even a local news crew setting up with quiet excitement. Maple Glen didn't get many grand openings, and certainly not ones with this much buzz. Noah stood near the entrance in a clean work shirt, sleeves rolled, grease-free for once. He kept checking the ribbon to make sure it hadn't slipped out of place, glancing at the makeshift podium where he was supposed to say something meaningful. He wasn't a man for speeches. He was a man for socket wrenches and oil changes. But this moment was different. Maddie, dressed in a polka-dot dress and plastic tiara, clutched a giant pair of novelty scissors with the solemn focus of a surgeon. "Are we ready, Daddy?" He knelt beside her, smiled. "Yeah, Bug, you got this?" She nodded seriously, her curls bouncing. "Totally." In the crowd, Sophie stood near the back. No fanfare, no attention-seeking, just a soft, quiet smile and hands folded in front of her. She wore jeans and a simple blazer, nothing to hint at her status, just enough to blend in. Only a few people in the crowd knew who she really was, and she liked it that way. Noah stepped up to the mic, cleared his throat, and looked out over the small sea of familiar faces. "I'm not much of a speaker," he started, voice steady but rough around the edges, "but I guess today calls for a few words. This garage isn't just a place to fix cars. It's a place to help people, honestly, fairly, and with heart." He paused, glanced at Maddie, who gave him a tiny thumbs up. "I named it Lila's Garage because my daughter's the reason I kept going, and because I wanted something built not just for me, but for her and this town." There was a smattering of applause, a few teary eyes. Then, with a proud grin, Maddie snipped the ribbon in one big, clumsy motion, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Noah looked out at them, then caught Sophie's eye through the noise. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just smiled, hands tucked in her coat pockets. And Noah smiled back, because she knew, they both knew. This was just the beginning. The last customer left just after sunset, their taillights fading down Main Street as the quiet finally settled over Lila's garage. The balloons had deflated a little. The coffee urn was nearly empty, and Maddie had long since fallen asleep on the worn office couch, clutching a ribbon like a trophy. Noah stood by the open garage door, arms crossed, the cool evening air brushing against his skin. He was bone-tired, but it was the good kind, the kind earned from something real. Behind him, the lights inside glowed soft and golden, reflecting off freshly polished tools and spotless tile floors. Sophie appeared beside him, her coat draped over one arm, eyes scanning the now empty parking lot. "You did it," she said, her voice low. Noah let out a breath. "We did it." A beat passed between them, quiet and full. Then, from a parked car across the street, an old Buick left behind by one of the mechanics, came the unmistakable warble of an old soul song drifting into the night through an open window, something slow, familiar, full of ache and warmth. Sophie smiled. "I love this song." Noah glanced at her, then at the stars just beginning to appear overhead. "Come on," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "What?" He extended a hand, playful but sincere. "One dance. We've earned it." Sophie hesitated for only a second before slipping her hand into his. "You realize we're in a parking lot." "I've danced in worse places," Noah said with a grin. They moved slowly, quietly, in the empty lot where oil stains still faintly marked the pavement. The music wasn't loud, but it wrapped around them like a secret. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his at her waist, and for a few minutes the rest of the world faded away. No business plans, no blueprints, no whispered rumors or headlines, just two people swaying beneath the stars, feet shuffling gently on cracked pavement, caught in a moment neither of them had expected, but both silently hoped would come. When the song faded into the next track, they didn't stop right away, because some dances weren't about music. They were about finally feeling like you belonged. The cafe was nearly empty, its usual morning bustle traded for the hush of late evening. Only one table was still lit, tucked in the far corner by the window, where Noah and Sophie sat with half-finished cups of coffee and the remains of a shared slice of blueberry pie between them. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass, a soft rhythm that filled the silences between their words. They'd been talking for hours, about nothing and everything. Stories from childhood, regrets, hopes, the quiet spaces in life they didn't always share with others. Noah found himself laughing more than he had in years. And Sophie. She looked softer here, her usual calm, replaced with something vulnerable and real. "I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this," she said, tracing the rim of her mug. "Small towns used to scare me." Noah leaned back, smiling. "We do have that effect. You blink, and suddenly people know your dog's name, your order, and your business." "I don't mind it now," she said, her gaze lifting to meet his. "Not when I'm sitting across from someone who doesn't care about any of the headlines." Noah held her gaze, and something passed between them, not loud or rushed, just a stillness. The kind that settles when two people realize they don't have to explain themselves anymore. "I think about you more than I should," he admitted quietly. Sophie's smile was slow, a little breathless. "Then we're both guilty." There was a pause. Not awkward, not hesitant, just the space between heartbeats when everything inside you knows what comes next. Noah leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Tell me to stop." "I won't," she whispered. And then they kissed. It wasn't a grand gesture, no fireworks, no orchestra, just a gentle meeting of lips in a corner booth, surrounded by the clink of dishes being washed and the low hum of a closing cafe. But in that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, and it felt, unmistakably, like the beginning of something they hadn't dared to hope for, something real, something theirs. It started with a headline. Noah was unlocking the front door of Lila's garage when his phone buzzed with a dozen unread notifications. At first he thought it was just congratulations from customers, or maybe another photo from Sophie. She'd sent one the night before, Maddie holding a wrench like it was a sword, face smeared with grease and pride. But then he saw the words, "Mystery Billionaire Funds, Small-Town Mechanic, inside Sophie Langford's secret project." He blinked, reread it, and felt the ground shift under his boots. By noon, the calls had started. First, a local reporter, then 2 national outlets. One tabloid even parked a van outside the shop, a guy with a long lens loitering across the street like he was waiting for someone to start crying. Customers came in wide-eyed and curious, whispering and glancing toward the office like something explosive might happen at any second. Noah slammed the office door behind him and stared at the article on his screen. Pictures of Sophie from investor conferences, award ceremonies. A couple of him, too, laughing with Maddie in front of the shop, unaware of the camera, unaware of the story being written without their permission. The worst part wasn't the exposure, it was the speculation. Did she buy him a business, or something more? Is he her pet project or her next trophy? What does she see in a man with grease under his nails and a paycheck that wouldn't buy her shoes? By late afternoon, Sophie arrived, quiet, composed, jaw set like she'd braced for impact. Noah didn't say anything at first, just handed her his phone with the article still open. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. "I didn't leak this," she said softly. "I swear." "I know," he replied, but his voice didn't sound like him. "I can make calls, get this taken down, spun, buried." Noah exhaled, slow and pained. "That's the problem, Sophie. You can bury it. I can't. I live in it." She opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head. "This was supposed to be ours," he said. "Now it feels like it belongs to everyone else." And for the first time in weeks, they stood on opposite sides of something they couldn't quite name. But suddenly, both had everything to lose. The garage felt colder than usual. Noah stood in the service bay, arms crossed, watching Sophie from across the room as she paced near the window. The media attention hadn't let up. If anything, it had only grown. Another article had dropped that morning, this one with pictures of them dancing in the parking lot, labeled "The Mechanic and the Mogul, Langford's Small-Town Romance." It wasn't just noise anymore, it was invasion. Customers stopped coming in the same way. Some acted starstruck, others suspicious. A few asked outright if he was planning to sell now that he'd cashed out. Noah hadn't spoken to Sophie in 2 days. When she finally showed up that afternoon, he'd hoped for clarity. Instead, her presence brought more questions. "I told my legal team to take action against the tabloids," she said, voice calm but edged with exhaustion. "We'll push for takedowns, cease and desists, anything we can do to "That's not the point," Noah cut in. Sophie stopped pacing. "Then what is?" He stepped forward, jaw tight. All of this, you turned it into a spectacle. People think I'm just some feel-good headline in your portfolio." Her face froze. "You don't really believe that?" "I didn't," he said. "But now, I don't know what to believe." Sophie's eyes shimmered, but she didn't blink. You think I did this for attention? You think I used you? You said you wanted something real, Noah snapped, his voice louder than he meant. But you didn't let me choose what that looked like. You showed up with all your power, your money, and dropped this fantasy on my doorstep. She flinched. Not visibly, but enough that he saw it. I gave you a chance, she whispered, voice cracking. Not because I wanted credit, because I believed in you. Noah looked at her, the weight of weeks, of hope, of vulnerability, closing in around him like a storm. I can't do this, he said quietly. He walked past her, not looking back, the echo of his footsteps louder than any goodbye. Sophie stayed behind, standing in a place they'd built together, now suddenly feeling like a stranger in her own story. The mornings felt hollow now. Noah still stopped by Brewhouse Café on his way to the shop, still ordered the same dark roast with 1 cream, still sat at the same corner table. But without Sophie across from him, without her quiet wit and the soft way she smiled over the rim of her cup, it wasn't the same. The coffee was just coffee. He tried to fill the silence with work. There were oil changes, tire rotations, a new transmission on a Chevy that refused to behave, but none of it felt like it had before. The joy, the sense of purpose, had dulled. It was as if someone had dimmed the lights and forgotten to turn them back on. And Lila noticed. She sat cross-legged at the garage's front counter one afternoon, coloring with a crayon that had been sharpened down to a nub. She kept glancing at her dad in that way kids do when they're trying to decide if now is the right time to ask a hard question. "Is the coffee lady coming back?" she finally asked, not looking up. Noah paused, wrench still in hand. "Don't think so, Bug." "Did you make her sad?" Lila asked, blinking innocently. "'Cause her face was sad last time." Noah sat down on the stool across from her, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't speak for a long moment. "I think I made both of us sad," he said quietly. Lila stopped coloring. "You miss her?" He looked at her, so small, so wise, in that childlike, uncomplicated way. "Yeah, I do." She nodded, like she'd known all along. "She made your eyes smile. They don't do that much anymore." That stuck with him. That night, after putting Lila to bed, Noah sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of lukewarm coffee and an ache in his chest he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just about the garage, or the headlines, or pride. It was about her. He missed Sophie, her voice, her questions, her belief in him when he couldn't find it in himself. And for the first time since she left, he whispered the truth aloud. "I want her back." The next morning, the sun filtered in through the living room windows, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor where Lila sat, legs sprawled, piecing together a puzzle with furrowed brows and sticky fingers. Noah stood in the kitchen pouring cereal into a chipped bowl, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the room. "Daddy," Lila said suddenly without looking up, "have you ever said sorry to someone big?" Noah paused mid-pour. "What do you mean, Bug?" "Like, not just for bumping into them or taking the last cookie, but for hurting their feelings." He leaned against the counter, spoon in hand. "Yeah," he said softly, "I have." "Did it fix everything?" "Not always." He walked over, kneeling beside her. "But it's not about fixing everything. Sometimes it's just about showing you care enough to try." Lila nodded slowly, pressing a puzzle piece into place. "I think I should say sorry to Bella at school. I yelled at her yesterday when she knocked over my tower." He smiled. "That's brave." Lila glanced up at him, eyes serious in that way that kids rarely get credit for. "Are you going to say sorry to the coffee lady?" Noah's smile faded a little. He sat down beside her, elbows on his knees. "I don't know if she wants to hear it." "Did she break your heart?" Lila asked gently. The question hit him harder than he expected. He stared at the puzzle, at the half-finished picture slowly coming together, and exhaled. "Maybe," he said. Lila was quiet for a second. Then she picked up a puzzle piece and offered it to him. Maybe she didn't break your heart. Maybe you closed it first. Noah looked at her, this little girl with tangled hair and 2 big opinions, and felt something tighten in his chest. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked, half smiling. "I don't know," she said with a shrug. "Sounds like something Mommy would have said." He wrapped his arms around her, then pulling her close. And as he held her, Noah realized the lesson he was trying to teach her about grace, about love, about second chances, was one he still needed to learn himself. And maybe it wasn't too late. It was raining again, not the hard, punishing kind that made people hurry, just a slow, steady drizzle that softened the edges of Maple Glen and turned sidewalks into quiet reflections. Noah sat in his car outside Brewhouse Café, watching the lights inside glow against the glass, windshield wipers ticking in a rhythm that matched the nerves in his chest. He hadn't planned what he'd say. That never worked. But he'd replayed it enough in his head to know one thing. He couldn't keep avoiding her. When he walked through the door, the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon wrapped around him like memory. And there she was. Sophie sat at their usual booth, a half-drunk cup of coffee in front of her, hair pulled back, eyes distant. She looked smaller somehow, like the past few weeks had carved quiet spaces into her. But when she looked up and saw him, she didn't flinch. She just watched. Noah approached slowly, hat in hand. "Can I sit?" he asked. She nodded once. He slid into the seat across from her, the silence between them thick but not bitter, just full. "I didn't come here to fix anything with big words," he began, voice low. "I just came to say, I'm sorry." She looked at him, steady and unreadable. "I didn't doubt your money," he said. "I doubted you, your heart, and I had no right to." Her jaw clenched just slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "You gave me something no one else had the nerve or the kindness to offer, not because you wanted a headline, but because you saw something in me I didn't even believe was there." He paused, searching for the words he'd been holding back, and when things got hard, I turned away. I let fear talk louder than truth. The cafe was quiet except for the low hum of conversation behind them and the soft tap of rain on the windows. Sophie finally spoke. "Why now?" "Because Maddie reminded me what real forgiveness looks like," he said. "And because walking away from you was the biggest mistake I've made since Emma died." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she reached across the table, fingertips brushing his. Noah let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Some bridges don't burn, they wait. They walked together after leaving the cafe, the rain now just a mist, clinging to the edges of streetlights and glistening on the pavement like scattered stars. The town was quiet. Maple Glen always seemed to settle early, but the hush between Noah and Sophie felt different this time. Not heavy, not broken, just new. Noah tucked his hands into his jacket pockets, glancing sideways at her. "You really didn't have to wait for me." "I didn't," she said, her tone light. "But I hoped." They passed the bookstore, then the corner where kids sold lemonade in summer. Every step seemed to echo memories they hadn't made yet. "You know," she said finally, "I'm stepping back." Noah looked at her. "From what?" "My company, Lang Holdings. The board will handle the big decisions. I've appointed someone else as interim CEO." He stopped walking. "You're leaving?" "I'm not disappearing," she said quickly. "I'm just done pretending I still care about things I don't. Quarterly projections, mergers, vanity projects." She looked up at him. "I spent years chasing legacy, building an empire, and the truth is, it's exhausting trying to hold up a world that never feels like yours." Noah studied her face, the calm in it, the quiet power that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with choice. "So what now?" he asked. "I want to invest in things that matter," she said. "People who build something with their hands. Towns that still say good morning. Places that remember your name. I want to help stories grow, not brands." He smiled, a little stunned. "That's a hell of a shift." Sophie shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe it's just the first honest move I've made in a long time." They started walking again, slower now. "And what about us?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. She looked at him, and in her expression was something simple and certain. "You?" she said. "Were never part of the plan." She reached for his hand. "You were the part I was hoping I'd be lucky enough to stumble into anyway." And somehow, in that moment, he knew. She meant it. Every word. The old gravel lot behind Lila's garage had always just been space. Room for overflow cars, the occasional snow pile in winter, and Maddie's chalk drawings in the summer. But now it buzzed with energy and purpose, a small crew laying the foundation for something bigger. Lila's Garage 2.0, they'd started calling it. The idea had come on a late-night walk, one of many Sophie and Noah now shared without needing to fill every silence. They'd talked about how much more the garage could be, how many young people in town didn't have direction, how many single parents needed steady work, a trade, a chance. Sophie had listened, asked questions, and then, like always, found a way to make the dream tangible. Now, just months after the ribbon cutting, the second building was taking shape. A training bay with full tool stations, a small classroom with clean, bright walls, childcare rooms in the back with soft mats, storybooks, and shelves of donated toys. The town hadn't just watched, it had shown up. Retired mechanics volunteered to teach. Local restaurants donated lunches for the apprentices. A contractor who'd once questioned Noah's vision offered labor at half the rate, saying simply, "You're building something real." Noah stood in the middle of the lot one afternoon, clipboard in hand, grease smudged across his forearm. Maddie sat nearby with a new group of kids, showing them how to twist lug nuts onto a practice tire with the same wide grin she wore the day she'd cut the first ribbon. Sophie stepped out of the office, waving a folder at him. New applicants? 3 more teens and a young mom looking to reskill, words getting out. He walked toward her, took the folder, and smiled. "Good. We'll make room." She watched him as he flipped through the pages, her gaze soft. "This place, it's more than a garage now." Noah glanced around. The laughter, the tools, the scent of oil and possibility. "It always was," he said. "We just didn't know it yet." Sophie slipped her hand into his, and for the first time in a long time, they both looked at the future and didn't feel afraid. They felt ready. Snow fell gently outside the window, blanketing Maple Glen in white and quiet. The kind of snow that muffled the world, softened every edge, and made even the sharpest memories feel warm around the edges. Inside the small house on Willow Street, the lights were low, the fire crackling, and laughter echoed through the rooms like music. Lila darted around the living room in fuzzy socks and a Santa hat, clutching a wrapped box and declaring herself Chief Present Inspector. Sophie, curled up on the couch in leggings and an oversized sweater, held a mug of cocoa with both hands, smiling at the chaos with a look that could melt even the iciest evening. Noah stood by the tree, adjusting a crooked ornament shaped like a tiny wrench, Maddie's gift to him last year. He watched the two of them, heart full in a way that surprised him even now. There was no press, no boardrooms, no articles about billionaire investors or small-town projects. Just this. Just home. "Okay," Lila said, placing the final gift under the tree with dramatic flair. "Now it's officially Christmas Eve." Noah looked over at Sophie. "She gets that from you." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "She's never seen me with this much sugar in my system." Lila jumped onto the couch between them, pulling a fleece blanket over all 3 of them. "Can we do the thing now?" Sophie tilted her head. "The thing?" "Yeah," Lila said. "The thing where we say what we're thankful for, even though it's not Thanksgiving." Noah smiled. "You start." Lila thought for a moment. I'm thankful for the garage, and for cookies, and for you two not being weird anymore. They laughed, really laughed, the kind that shakes your shoulders and warms your chest. Sophie went next. I'm thankful for second chances, she said, looking at Noah, and for finally finding a reason to stay. Noah's hand found hers beneath the blanket. I'm thankful, he said, his voice low and sincere, for everything I never saw coming. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire burned steady, and in that little house, surrounded by light, by love, by the family they'd built, the world finally felt like it had found its place. Home. The cafe hadn't changed much. Same scratched-up wood tables, same hum of conversation, same chalkboard specials, leaning slightly crooked near the register. Brewhouse Café had seen years of comings and goings, but it still held that quiet kind of warmth, the kind that wrapped around you on cold mornings like an old quilt. Noah sat in their usual booth, Sophie across from him, both hands wrapped around her mug. She wore a wool scarf he'd picked out at the winter market, and her smile came easy now, no longer weighed down by everything she used to carry. He was mid-sentence, something about Maddie's latest plan to install a vending machine in the waiting area at the garage, when his eyes drifted past her to a corner table near the window. A young woman sat alone, her shoulders drawn in, her coffee untouched. Her eyes were glassy, and one tear traced silently down her cheek. She didn't notice the people around her, or if she did, she didn't care. She looked the way Sophie once had. Noah didn't say anything. He simply stood, walked to the counter, and ordered another coffee, extra cream, no sugar. When it was ready, he carried it over and set it gently on the table. On me, he said with the same soft smile he'd given once before. Hope today gets better. The woman looked up, startled. Her voice caught somewhere behind the ache in her throat. She gave the smallest nod, her fingers curling around the warm cup like it might anchor her. Noah didn't linger. He returned to his seat across from Sophie, who had been watching quietly. She didn't say a word, just reached across the table and slid her hand into his. You remember, she said softly. I always will, he replied. Outside, the world moved on. Snow melting off rooftops, cars splashing through puddles, people hurrying to whatever came next. But inside the cafe, the air was still, gentle, full of something unspoken. Because sometimes it really is just a cup of coffee. And sometimes that's how everything begins.